Okay, good evening everyone. Tonight we're doing question and answers. If you're looking to ask questions, if you're not here with us, if you're here with us, you get to ask me questions every day anyway. But if you're online wondering how do you ask questions for this, you have to go to our website at meditation.sirimangalo.org and ask questions there. And you have to sign up, but that's purposeful because we want to make it hard for you. If it's too easy, people go and ask too many questions. I mean, we get questions that are off topic, so we want to ensure that people are serious before they ask questions. Also, we're only really trying to answer questions about this tradition, about our meditation practice that are going to be useful for our group. So without further ado, we have 9 questions so far. First, we have a couple of questions. I would prefer if you could separate them out, I think. I'm not 100% on that, but if you got multiple questions, please do separate them out. It's not really fair to, well, it's just not as clean. And, shut down. 1 minute. Back in. Okay. Good. Okay, so first question. Some people criticize Mahasi Sayadaw's teachings, saying they are overly technical. How would you refute that? Well, my immediate feeling about this is that I probably wouldn't. I'm not really that keen on going out of my way to refute people. If people want to see something as overly technical, I mean, ultimately I imagine that most people who say that are looking to find fault, first of all. But then if we are to examine the question, what is it that you find too technical? The books that he wrote? Because I don't find them any more technical than other traditional Buddhist teachings. They might be a little more technical than the suttas, only a little bit. In fact, in some ways they're less technical than the suttas because they involve all sorts of stories from the commentaries. The great thing about Mahasi Sayadaw is he's able to inspire at the same time as give such deep and what you might call technical teachings. There's nothing wrong with being technical. And I think that's a feeling that people have. A criticism I would give back is that people are often looking for teachings that are vague, or not vague, but simple, and we might use the word touchy-feely, like they feel good. And I have listened to talks and to be honest, I've also Western talks often, where some are very good, but sometimes you listen to them and you ask yourself, what did I learn? And I didn't really learn much, but I enjoyed myself. The Dhamma talks are sometimes like that, and that's what we wouldn't want. Technical is often much preferable because it provides you with tools, right? Technical, I won't look it up on the internet, but technical has to do with skills and tools. So if it's just something that makes you feel good, like I give you a talk and you feel good afterwards, well, I don't feel like I did I did the job of inspiring you, perhaps, and that's useful. But it's not nearly enough and not nearly as good as providing a technique, technical advice. I think the Mahasi Sayadaw's teachings I think they're brilliant. I've never read anything, even that I'm reading them in translation, I've never read anything as wonderful. apart from, as in terms of an explanation of the Buddha's teaching, apart from the teachings themselves, of course. And if you're talking about the actual practice, I mean, I'd have to ask for a quorum here, and the people in the room. I won't ask, but I imagine asking all the people in the room here what they think, whether this practice is too technical. It's fairly formal, but I would use words like concrete. It's very concrete. You don't have to guess about what you're supposed to do. It's rather involved and rather taxing, challenging. Involved in the sense there's quite a technique to it. So it is quite technical, I guess, in that sense. But I don't have much more to say about that. Then about Ajahn Chah, well, I'm not interested in comparing with Ajahn Chah. It's a different teacher in Thailand. But he says that basically insight has to develop out of peace and tranquility. Maybe you could argue that. I think without any sort of tranquility and peace, it's hard to imagine insight becoming mature. But then he says the entire process will happen naturally of its own accord. You can't force it. We can't force it. And I imagine, again, this is a translation from Thai, obviously, but I imagine he had the best of intentions when he said that, and his meaning was, given the benefit of the doubt, was good, was right. But I have a problem with that statement as it stands if you interpret it to mean that if you practice tranquility, if you calm your mind down, insight will grow out of it naturally, and that's not true. It will not arise naturally of its own accord unless you're actually practicing a sort of meditation that's capable of providing insight, which, very simply is a meditation focused on reality. If you're not focused on reality, insight will not arise. By very definition, insight is seeing impermanent suffering and non-self. If you're practicing certain types of meditation designed to calm you down, metta, for example, you'll never see impermanent suffering and non-self because the objects are not impermanent, are not unsatisfying, are not uncontrollable. I mean, there's a sense of stability, and there involves entities, people, beings who are actors and entities and all sorts of things associated with self. So yeah. So your question, do you need to calm the mind in order for insight to arise, or will calm naturally arise through insight practice? This is, again, going back to the Yuganada Sutta. We're lucky that we have this sutta that says sometimes arahants will have practiced insight first and then develop tranquility after. I mean, it's quite clear from this sutta that the Buddha had, these sort of questions were being asked, and he gave very clear instruction, which I think it's instructive for those people who want to say it has to be like this or it has to be like that. When the Buddha quite clearly said it can be like this or it can be like that. How to use mindfulness to overcome panic attacks, phobia. I'm sure you've been asked this question before, so sorry for a repetitive question. Now, I would normally have deleted such a question because, yes, I do answer this one a lot. But this one particularly, I have a soft spot for it because it is one that we get a lot, and it's not a trivial question. But I would recommend, I'm only going to answer by recommending that you look up some of my other videos on anxiety, and that you read my booklet and try to practice accordingly, because that's about it. To stop taking medication, don't get interested in medication for any of this stuff. Start meditating. Any of that. Am I allowed to say that? Stop taking medication? No, I shouldn't. Oh no, that was a mistake. Well, you say, I started working with doctors and taking meds. Honestly, they don't help. I apologize for saying don't take your medication. It's what I want to say, but I can't say it because I'm not a doctor. So what I'll say instead is, I agree that medication is, from what I've seen, not as helpful as people think it is. And I would recommend meditation as a solution because I have seen it to be very helpful. Now, if you're on medication, it's not likely that meditation will be all that fruitful, so I wouldn't recommend mixing them. Sorry, that's all I can say, I guess. Here's one. Is it okay to be mindful of breath and body movements during the day, then note distracted or memories and go back to noting? I think the answer is yes. I mean, you're talking about being mindful of your experiences, which it shows that you've got a good grasp of what we're talking about. You're feeling responsible. Right. Yeah, you feel like you've done something bad, and then yes. If you feel sorry for yourself, note that sorry, and then just go back to your practice. Is it possible to cultivate faith, or is that something that is spontaneously developed? It's possible. I don't think it's very stable. I mean, a lot of theists and other religious people develop great faith purposefully. I mean, I think like any mental state, there are practices you can do to encourage it, is probably better to say. You can't just say, I'm going to have faith. But you can engage in practices like prayer. We do chanting, which creates faith. Nothing's ever spontaneously developed. Everything has conditions. And so there are ways of cultivating faith, and they'll differ depending on your situation and your condition. For some people, reading the Buddha's teaching is a great way to gain faith. For some people, for other people, I mean, with the proviso that faith is not what we're really trying to focus on building. You should really just focus on mindfulness, and everything else balances out. What's really useful is to see which ones you're lacking, and then be mindful of that. If you have doubts, so not doubting. That's the teachings on the 5 faculties are much more for helping you pinpoint what you have to be mindful of than saying, okay, now I'm going to build faith. It's not really that useful. Again, 3 questions, so I'd prefer if you broke them up. Makes it easier to read at the very least. Before I start to meditate, must I chant texts? No. Would you recommend to lay people to chant in the morning, evening? Yes. I wouldn't recommend people who weren't thinking about it, but if someone's looking to gain encouragement, sure. Yes, it's a good thing. I am making very good progress in meditation, meditating for about 30 to 45 minutes almost every second day. Great. But for a few weeks, something strange has happened. I have to swallow constantly. And the fear of swallowing makes you swallow. That's fine. The fear is an emotion. You would say afraid, or worried, or anxious, or however it appears to you. And as you're swallowing, you would say swallowing. It's an interesting object of meditation. There's no problem there. There's no need to handle it. Again, handling things is our go-to reaction, but that's not how this works. We're just trying to stop trying to handle. Learn to bear and to coexist with that experience, and it'll go away by itself. It's not actually a problem. I have a restless mind that quickly becomes frightened. Are emotions as object correct in the sense of the Dhamma? I've achieved very good results in just watching with sati my emotions and finally dissolve only by the observation. Well, that's not how we practice. We would have you note afraid, or restless. Okay, question about reading. Wonder if reading doesn't keep us in a world of concepts. at least unnecessarily involved in someone else's drama. Well, if you mean reading fiction, reading itself, you're asking, is reading a wholesome activity? Reading itself is not wholesome or unwholesome. Reading is an act that occurs with the eye, and then with the brain, and then with the mind. It's a functional activity. Now, reading gives rise to thinking, and thinking, of course, can give rise to all sorts of emotions, good or bad, positive or negative. If you read the Buddha's teachings, it's quite possible that as a result of that, there will arise all sorts of good qualities. If you're reading, romance, Harlequin romance, less likely. Much more likely that to give rise to unwholesome thoughts. Now, they do say it's good for the brain, but that's something quite different. They say even reading fiction is good to stimulate the brain and maybe even keep you healthy, you could argue, perhaps. They've done studies on it, but that's totally unrelated to Buddhist practice, of course. During Vipassana, I'm not able to note the start of thinking. Could you give me any tips? Yeah, don't worry about it. If you catch the beginning, that's great. If you catch it at the end, that's fine. Whenever you catch it, try to be mindful. I mean, there's so much going on inside that we're not even thinking of trying to be perfect. We're just trying to catch whenever we experience something. Oh, I was thinking there. Then say to yourself, thinking. Once you realize it. Is celibacy related to metta in any way? You could probably relate them. Metta can be problematic for celibacy if you start sending good thoughts to someone who is an object of attraction. They do say that in the texts. Be careful about that. But I don't think that's what you're asking. If a person is celibate, are they better able to practice metta, or is it a practice of metta? You could argue that. Celibacy is great for the mind because it drains a lot of that passion, and it makes you much more stable and calm in the mind. So not just metta, but many kinds of states are much easier to cultivate. If you're not being celibate, then things like metta are more difficult because you're more subject to partiality, which is like if you think about your girlfriend, your boyfriend, and you send them metta, well, it's much more likely to become an attachment, which is quite dangerous, well, emotionally dangerous, because of the suffering, of course, that can follow. How does one let go without feeling the want to explode? How does one let go? You don't let go. Just if you want to explode out of the human shell and let out the howl of anger, hate, and destructive nature, well, that's what you try to be mindful of, and eventually let go of that. Because that desire is a response to experience and probably a lot of physical energy. But it's a bad habit, and so you try to change those habits through meditation. Read my booklet. Be a good practice for that. According to Buddhism, is there a difference between compassion and empathy? We don't use the word empathy much. I don't even know that you could find a word that translates. Maybe you could, but I can't think of one that translates as empathy. Empathy means to feel what other people are feeling. You can sympathize. Sympathy means you appreciate the scope of what people are feeling. But to empathize means you feel it with them. And that's quite different from compassion. Compassion isn't about feeling sad when someone's sad. It's about appreciating and having a wish for them to be, or having a inclination so that everything you do and say is towards them being free from that sadness or that suffering. And that's it. Everyone here is a fairly advanced meditator, so I don't feel any great need to teach them lots of things. I'm very glad that we have over full house. I had some idea that we might be moving soon, but it's a tricky thing. If there's anybody out there who has a place for us to move that's bigger, we're happy to take donations. But we're doing fine. We can do fine anywhere. No, someone slipped another question in. Should we take it? Let's take it. It's not a question, so bye-bye. Okay, that's all. Thank you. Have a good night. Oh no, I didn't. Oh, now you can see me. That's funny. That whole teaching was just with this transition, and that picture of me was, that's just the intro. I'm supposed to transition out of that. Well, hello everyone. Have a good night.